My name is Devin Booker, and I help Microsoft 365 businesses protect themselves from identity-based attacks. And in this video, I'm going to be talking to you guys about how I was able to take the access of 13 global admins and reduce them to have no permanent access, God mode level access. So this is an Excel sheet that I created for this lab. Now, I'm going to talk to you guys about the script that I used to basically scrape my 365 environment to pull this data, right? Obviously, I didn't go ahead and take this and enter it manually. So I went ahead and I used this script right here. So let's go ahead and make that smaller. So I was able to pull all of this information from this script right here. So I'm going to break down the script. So this is a Powershell script, by the way. First line right here is it pulls all the directory roles, all the admin roles inside my 365 environment, right? And before this, you actually have to connect your PowerShell to Microsoft Graph. So you have to put that in. Once you do, it's a super simple command. It's just connect-mggraph. Once you do, it's going to tell you to sign in with your email and password. This is obviously, or that way of signing in is better for just one-offs, or, for example, in this environment where I was doing it on my own home lab environment, because I know my username and password. But in a enterprise environment, you actually would use a tenant ID, a secret key, and a client ID, and you would use that to authenticate yourself into this Microsoft Graph session. But I didn't show that here. I'm going to be talking about that in another video. But yeah, this script right here goes ahead and it pulls all the directory roles, all the admin roles, and then for each of the roles, it gets the members, right? So you have here like your Exchange administrator, your AI administrator, your global administrator, SharePoint administrators. Some of the other ones are like Teams administrators. You have your user administrator, your license administrator. So it went ahead and it pulled all of those users, right? And for those users, it showed me what their display name is and their role name, right? And more of a raw look of what that looks like is actually right here. So once I went ahead and ran that script, this is what the output actually looked like, right? So it has their name, has their role, and then also has a role ID, right? And this can be really, really useful when maybe you are having to program a script in a different language. This can be really useful because this is universal, right? Now, it pulled 25 assignments, right? Doesn't mean that there's 25 separate users. Some of these users, like for example, Johanna, she was a global administrator and she was an Exchange administrator. So those counts too, right? For example, I'm in here, I'm a global administrator, just a global administrator. But for example, Miriam is also a global administrator and an AI administrator, right? So it pulled 25 assignments in my organization. And obviously, having 13 global administrators in one organization is horrible, right? Global administrator is like you have God mode access, right? You have access to everything. You can do anything and everything inside an environment. And obviously that's not good, because the more privileged an account is, right? If it gets infiltrated, just think like the hackers just need to access the account with the highest level of privileges and it can do whatever it wants, right? So obviously having 13 accounts with no limits, right? as you can see, it's horrible. So, and I've worked in IT for over 3 years now, almost 4 years. And I have seen countless times when IT administrators, they just go ahead and give access, right? Like, oh, like this person needs to do this. I'm just going to go ahead and give them access, right? But in reality, you should be following the principle of least privilege, right? And what that means is only giving somebody the privilege that they need, right? Not necessarily the keys to the kingdom from the get-go, right? Because most times, as long as you have good separation of duties in your organization, most times a person is not going to need access to do everything, right? Because most likely, if that person has access to do everything or needs access to do everything, they're most likely like a senior architect or engineer, right? And usually those types of people are very few, right? You're not going to have 20 senior architect or engineers working at a company usually. So that was the premise and motivation for this lab, for this script that I built, right? So I want to talk to you guys a little bit now about what a good tiered model actually looks like, right? How do you actually break up the roles, right? How many roles should each person have? How many areas should a person be in, right? So you start off on tier 0. Tier 0 is your break glass and emergency only tier, right? This is like when, nothing else is working. This is like the last resort, right? These accounts are going to have your highest privileges. These are your global administrators and your privileged role administrator, right? A good rule of thumb is you should only have 2 global administrators max. And then privileged role administrators, you should have 1 to 2, right? Now, what a privileged role administrator is a type of account that basically dictates the privileges for other accounts, right? You should only have 1 or 2 accounts. So, for example, in my org, the global administrators and the privileged role administrator I made was myself, right? Of course, I had to be myself. And then I also made Megan another global administrator. And then when you go down a tier, you go to tier 1, you have your, there's more than these, but these were the most common ones, right? These are your service specific accounts, right? So you have your Exchange administrator, your Teams administrator, your SharePoint administrator, your user administrator, and your security administrator, right? And in those parentheses, I put a little bit about what they do if you don't know, but they're pretty straightforward, right? And in my organization, I went ahead and gave 5 users those 5 privileges. And then the lowest tier, which is tier 2, is your help desk and support, right? These are your level 1s. These are the people who shouldn't really have a lot of access to do a lot of things, right? You have your help desk administrator and then your license administrator. And again, in those parentheses, I put in what they do. Mostly help desk administrators are known for password resets. Any questions, if a user has any questions, usually help desk is the first place that they go. And then license administrator to assign licenses. And in my org, I went ahead and gave 2 people the help desk role and then 2 people the license admin role. And then this last part of my chart, I went ahead and talked about the separation of duties, right? So just like in the government, in the US government, we have 3 parties, or not necessarily 3 parties, but 3 parts of the government, right? We have your legislative, judicial, and then executive, right? I really had to think about that for a second. It's the same thing in security, right? You don't give every single person the access to do everything, right? Because it kind of defeats the purpose of having a secure environment, right? Not putting all your eggs in one basket, right? So no one person should have global admin and billing admin. No one person should have permanent global admin access, right? They should not be able to, in their personal account that they use every single day, they should not be able to access everything, right? And when I say everything, I'm talking about making configuration changes to the environment that, are not normal, right? Mostly these are settings that you would set up whenever you're first provisioning in an environment, right? And I say that because let's say a hacker gets into an account that has global admin access, right? Their now compromised account supersedes everybody else's, right? They can make any configuration change they want and not have to get approval by anybody, right? If you think about that, it's kind of scary. And then service admins, they shouldn't be able to modify security settings, right? These service specific accounts, right? These are administrators. These are not accounts that are made to necessarily change an environment. And then help desk can't grant admin roles, right? This is kind of just common sense. Somebody who is, at the very bottom should not be able to grant other people admin roles because they can grant themselves an admin role, right? So now that we talked about kind of the before state, I'm going to show you guys what the after state looked like, right? So I minimized it by over half, went from 25 to 12, right? And this was really cool. I went ahead and I color coded the different tiers that we just talked about. So obviously, like I said, these are the accounts with their roles, what tier they are, and then the assignment types, right? And now this PIM, right? PIM stands for Privileged Identity Management. Now, where it says 4 hours plus approval, what that means is these global admins, right, myself and Megan included, we don't have permanent global admin access, right? We have access to global admin privileges for a 4-hour window, but we have to have approval, right? Usually from the other global admin. And this basically allows the account not to have the highest level of privileges all the time, right? Only having the privileges that I need whenever I'm doing something that nobody else can do, right? Obviously it would be during work hours. It would be, doing something that other people know that I would be doing, and that's why that approval part is there. But hackers, they love to target accounts when people are asleep, right? Overnight, early mornings, right? Like if it didn't have approval and it didn't have this 4-hour window, if a hacker was to be able to hack into my account, they would have global admin access, and for however long before I wake up or before I get back into the account, they would be able to do whatever they can do, right? And that's horrible. So now let's talk about the executive summary, right? This is what's really important. This is, if you are in identity access management and you are consulting, this is what you're going to show business owners, right? And business owners, if you're watching this is what's important, right? The meaty stuff, right? So I went from 25 to 12, right? And obviously there are some duplicates in there. Like for example, I have 2 roles, right? I'm the only duplicate in here, I believe. But I have 2 privileged roles, right? But I went from 12 to 15, or went from 25 to 12. Unique admin users went from 13 to 11. Global admin assignments went from 13 to 3. And 3 just meaning, should actually be 2. I'll change that right now because there's only 2 global admins. And then permanent global admin access went from 13 to 0. And then this next section right here, talking about compliance. If compliance is important to you, pay attention to this section. But identity security is actually a big part of compliance. So I talked about SOC 2, NIST 853, which is very common, ISO 2701, CMMC, and then cyber insurance. So these are some of the controls that are in these frameworks that I mentioned that have to do with privilege access, identity access management. And these were some of the evidence of why I put these things were compliant. And then the risk reduction summary. So obviously the permanent tier 0 exposure, which was the 13 there's 13 global admins, permanent global admins. I reduced that to 0. So that's 100% reduction in standing God mode access. Privilege sprawl. So the number of people who have privileges, the number of assignments was 25, and I was able to narrow that down to 12, which is a 52% reduction in overprivileged accounts, right? There should have not been 13 global admin accounts. Now there's only 2. Separation of duties, making sure before there was 10 users with multiple roles, and now there's only 1 user, which is me, with multiple roles. But I have just-in-time access, meaning that 4-hour window, right? Which is a 90% reduction in role stacking. Blast radius, the credential compromise. So 13 global admin accounts had full tenant access. That was the before. Now 0 have permanent and 2 have just-in-time. And then audit readiness just talks about a little bit of the compliance for SOC 2 and ISO 27001. So this is a template that I will give to you guys if you guys want to use this. It will be linked down in the description. It makes it really easy to just fill out real quick. And it could be used for your own business or for somebody else's business that you're consulting for. It makes it really easy for the business owner to take a look at this and see how impactful identity security is, right? And as well as any other space in security, you need to audit this stuff regularly, right? Make a habit of looking at the privileges inside your environment and making sure that the people who don't need access anymore don't have any access, right? Or they maybe don't need all the access that they have right now, right? Maybe it needs to be a little separated as far as, the privileges that they have. So thank you guys for watching. This was quick, short, and sweet. If you guys have any questions or anything that you guys would like to see next, please let me know. Be sure to subscribe, like the video, follow me on LinkedIn. That's probably the best place to ask me a question. I'm very quick to reply. And yeah, I'll go ahead and put everything that you need in the description, and I'll catch you in the next one.